Welcome to the Iconic Podcast with me, Soon Yu, your host. The Iconic Podcast features candid conversations with successful Asian and AAPI leaders who share their personal journeys of challenges and triumphs. The Iconic Podcast is brought to you by the Asian American Foundation, by Gold House, and by the founders of the Asian Alumni Chapter of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and is made possible through the generous support of Altos Ventures, whose offices also serve as the home of the Iconic Podcast. It's my pleasure today to welcome Manny Maceda to the Iconic Podcast. Manny is the CEO or worldwide managing partner of Bain & Company. Welcome, Manny.
Hey, welcome, my friend. Nice to see you. So nice to be here.
So nice to see you again. It's only been, a period of 30 plus years since we saw each other. So it's not that long ago.
And then I ran into you about 3 days ago, right?
Yes, we did run into each other at a fundraiser or a art event. That was great. For those of you who don't know what Bain is, it's one of the top consulting firms in the world. And I can say that because I was fortunate enough to actually be a low-level associate there, actually starting the same year, or maybe even the same month as you, Manny, in 1988, probably around September timeframe. And so I think we started at the same time. Of course, I was an associate. I think you came in as a consultant. And let's just say our trajectories were a little bit different. I left within less than 2 years, and I think you've been there for over 30 years. And in that time frame, you've shepherded it to be an incredible company. You led the Asia practice. You led many different, I think, thought leadership practices for the company. And most importantly, I think you've helped shape the culture. And as a key result, Bain has been listed as the number one place to work consistently over the last 4 or 5 years by Glassdoor, by Forbes, by a whole bunch of incredibly important rankings. And so congratulations on that. And also, you are one of the founding members of TAF, which is one of the organizations sponsoring this podcast. So I definitely want to get into all of that. But before we begin, I really thought about this idea of the podcast, and it is really the idea of celebrating the hero's journey, both the excitement of beginning the journey, obviously reaching our destination, but all the trials and tribulations that we encounter to get there. And I feel like you've not only embodied the idea of the hero's journey, but you've unlocked the full potential of what it means to be a hero. And I think it's because you understand the idea of embracing a North Star. And I love the idea of you being an expert on full potential transformation, and really not only on the professional side, but on a personal side. And when I look at your background, it's so interesting. I have a lot of guests that sort of are rags to riches. You were kind of riches to rags, then to riches again. So you're very different. Let's start with your childhood. I mean, you actually came from what I would consider a fairly important, well-known, a highly contributing family. Can you talk a little bit about your family and your background?
Sure. And by the way, I do remember when we started together soon, but I remember you with long, dark hair. So.
I was a hippie.
The journey. So to the extent it's riches to rags to riches, that might be accurate. I grew up in Manila, on the other side of the world. And yes, as my childhood, and probably till I was 12, 13, was from a privileged background. I was a son of parents who were in prominent fields. One was in motion picture production, the equivalent of Bollywood in that country, and then my dad was in politics in even in the 1960s when I was a kid. That's a lot of my memories of that period, so it was a privileged and sheltered upbringing, and then maybe the rags part. The world changed in the 70s. For those of you who follow the history of that country, our democratic elected president at the time, when his term was about to end, declared martial law to control the country and had a dictatorship for the next 14 years, from 72 to 86. And during that period, that was maybe the rags part of the story. My folks split up. My mom's company went bankrupt. My dad, because he's switched to opposing the dictatorship, had everything taken away, ended up having to emigrate, really escape, and he was granted political asylum. The topic of political asylum is topical again today, but back then he was a legitimate grantee of asylum from that government, and so so I was the oldest of a bunch of kids, and did stay there through my high school and my freshman year at the University of the Philippines. And then, to the extent there's another part of the story, I came to visit my dad for the summer in 1981. Before I was going to start my sophomore year of university, and he was eking out a living in New York, and he basically convinced me, hey, don't go back, just stay here. And put myself through college. 43 years later, I'm still here is the short answer, and did okay. And my dad would eventually go back to Manila, and he would have his own version of the story, because the dictatorship was overthrown. He became part of the administration of what became President Aquino. But I've stayed here in the U.S. this whole time, and eventually found myself joining a small firm in San Francisco that you were hanging out with at the same time. And that's another part of the story.
I think the fall from the riches to rags is more dramatic than you're sharing, because you're so humble. Your dad was a famous senator. In fact, he was president of the Senate at some point. He was somebody that was highly, highly regarded in politics. And your mom ran the largest, she was the CEO of the largest film company in the Philippines at the time. And for both of them to have to really, I think, hit a difficult time at the same time, this idea of her going through bankruptcy, and then your dad literally fleeing to the U.S. from the Philippines with hardly anything. I think the quote was, with just the clothes off his back. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd say that's reasonably fair. It's almost like straight out of a James Bond movie. It's like, a Bangkok to a ship offshore, a freighter to Hong Kong, and then landing in New York, where his aunt, who lived in Brooklyn, took him in, and then trying to make a living there. Early days of Uber, something called a Fugazi limo, selling insurance, and then he was able to pass the bar and get a license. The Philippine legal system was essentially a carbon copy of the United States from the time the Philippines was a U.S. colony, and so to be able to practice law in your 40s, having already done stuff, and that's how he was able to support himself in New York. And so so I watched the journey through his eyes. I watched it through my mom's, who was pressed into the CO job because her dad died, and she was the oldest kid, and without really a background in business necessarily, and the challenging times. And and while I don't want to overplay or underplay the arc of everyone's life, frankly, the biggest part for me as the oldest of five boys, 7 years apart, within 7 years, we were sort of a basketball team. The fact that they split up too was a big part of the story, because I always thought of my first reaction when that happens is, and we were sort of divided up. Two of us, not to get into family dynamics, that two of us lived with my dad, two of us lived with my mom, and one, the youngest, lived with grandma. That's how the five of us were divided up. So there was multiple things going on that you could argue are traumatic. Same time, it was happening to a whole nation, right? To some degree. So I don't want to overplay an individual's journey or story. And obviously it was hard for me, but you learn self-sufficiency and so actually showing up in the US and then applying to universities as a sophomore, getting in, it was very important to get that first year of credit, because you could have, that's one less year
that you have to pay for.
You have to pay for, and then supporting yourself through 3 years before you can get a good full-time job. And also just learning about the United States. I went to school in the Illinois Institute of Technology in the south side of Chicago, and getting exposed to a very different, social, racial dynamic as well, that educates you, coming from what's kind of a melting pot country of the Philippines, but and that actually also helps in your integration and your perspective. So it's definitely an interesting, life story, but I came out okay the other side, right?
You came out great, Manny. You came out great.
I got a good job out of college. My younger brothers who have all done okay. My dad ended up going back. My mom ended up being productive, and so it was fine. Those were challenging times for sure in the 70s and the 80s.
Well, I think what's truly amazing is also when I looked at your journey, you came to the U.S. and you had to seek scholarships and had to borrow money from a family, basically different family members, not from one family member, but from multiple family members. And you had multiple part-time jobs. Can you talk a little bit about growing up fairly privileged? I think you went to one of the best private schools in Manila, and then you even went to the University of Philippines, and then all of a sudden having to come to the U.S. and having to basically ask, friends and family for money and work part-time.
Well, I think we are the Filipinos, as it's a supportive, family-oriented culture. And so you don't want to overplay if you help your nephew, your cousin. And I've tried to do that too. I have nieces and nephews who are coming here now. So the fact that people would pull together to help, and then obviously sorting out when you come here, this has always been, for me, you idealize the United States as essentially a first generation immigrant, right? It's the land of opportunity. It's a land of meritocracy compared to some of the dynamics back home. So to be able to get scholarships and grants, and then work part time while you're cutting your college load. I was doing programming work, Fortran and COBOL, for a commodities trader in Chicago. If you remember the movie Trading Places, I said, this is probably a really cool thing to do. And tutoring physics on the side, which was probably my favorite science subject. But it was good. And then, I was able to get good jobs in the summer, and then graduated on time. So it was nice to be able to graduate in 3 years and have I was a chemical engineer, so I had a range of job offers, and I picked one in Wilmington, Delaware, the DuPont company, because they had a nice program where you do different parts of the company. I did a year in the lab, a year in the field, and then a year at corporate in product management. And by the end of that, you're theoretically now ready for more responsibility. Now, half of my class went off to business school. So there's sort of you feel a little bit sheepish and maybe a little guilty that the company invested in you, and then you don't really get to pay back that much. And so, I do reflect on the time. I'm grateful for the time at DuPont. And then I went off to business school and discovered an industry I'd never heard of. And a company I'd never heard of, by the way, within that industry. And it's one you and I crossed paths with 30 plus years ago.
Yeah, and I want to come to the idea of how you ended up at Bain, but I think it's really important. A couple of things. I'm listening to you, and I'm here trying to paint doom and gloom in terms of your father's background and what he had to go through, and your mother, and then obviously you as the oldest. And through it all, I sense two things: incredible positivity, and incredible positivity driven by the ability to be grateful for the things that were in front of you, the learning that you were getting, and the opportunities. And I just feel like, as we always hear about the idea of grit, but I think grit without gratitude is much more difficult than grit with gratitude. And so I sensed a huge degree of gratitude that lets you get through some of those hard times. Is that kind of a fair sort of assessment of the way you tackle some of life's difficulties and challenges?
Yeah, even though you and I haven't hung out a lot over the last 30 plus years, my old friend, I think that's probably a reasonable read, on me. I do tend to think positive. I do think it's frame of mind. And I do think gratitude comes with that. And, and you go back to, we're all formed by different forces growing up. And if I look at my mom and dad, who are very different people, maybe my dad had the grit, incredibly hard worker, driven, ambitious, almost to a fault, by the way, because we can come to this too later. For all he achieved in life, he was actually never happy and satisfied. And so I didn't, because he never achieved his ultimate goal. That's almost, and I tried not to over-index to. I think there is a journey. You said here's a journey. There is a destination, but it is about the journey also, not just the destination. And it's a little bit how you comport yourself in the journey and who you travel with. We can have a dialogue about that. My mom, I probably picked up, gratefulness, gratitude from her, and I do think there is a overlap between positivity and gratitude. Be grateful for the gifts you have, and not what you don't. My oldest daughter and I used to have this chat, and it's in poker terms, for any of you who play, it's like play the hand you're dealt, right? And sometimes you get dealt a pair of aces, that's great, and sometimes you get a 2 and a 7. That's great too. It's just the hand you're dealt. And it's all about what you can do with a hand. Because you're not in control necessarily of a lot of things that you end up being negative about, or you wish you had that you don't have, or you wish you had because you used to have it. Back to the richest to rags, the richest story. So I do think if the frame of reference is, we're all dealt a set of cards. Let's be grateful for what we have, and let's do what we can with it. That, I think, that's probably the grit component. And I've always been grateful. I mean, there's not that much gloom, through this, I had a family, who loved me. I had great opportunities because I was still able to go to a school. I found good companies to work for, good mentors. It's like, I haven't dwelled too much, on the downsides in life. There's been some. We can talk about that too. And I'm human. You can't. You're not going to be naive and say, yeah, everything's always rose-colored. Although that is a frame of mind too. But by and large, I like to think I've been quite fortunate, and I'm grateful for that.
Are you ready to be part of a community that amplifies the voices of Asian leaders in business, government, and the arts? The founders of this podcast are members of the Asian Alumni Chapter of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, whose mission is to empower Asian and AAPI voices in our community. By subscribing to this podcast, you'll stay up to date on the latest Iconic episodes, and importantly, gain exclusive invitations to select Stanford Asian alumni events that can provide useful insights and a powerful network to help you on your personal and professional journeys. Go to iconicpodcast.com and subscribe today. Join us and be a part of a community that's shaping the future of Asian leadership.
But I will admit, I guess 12, 13 years ago, when I did put myself forward for consideration and they asked somebody else, that for all I'm prepared and positive and, grateful, it hit me hard. It also created some fears, by the way.
Well, I think this positive attitude is something that is, I think, infectious. I think it served you incredibly well in, I think, many roles. I know that you left DuPont and thought, man, I've been exposed to all these different elements of the business, and how might I put that together in a sort of a business school, in a master's of management? And I know you went to MIT, and there's a famous story now. It's even on your wiki profile, of course. I
don't know who actually writes the wiki profile.
I know it kind of takes a life of its own. Why did the story show up there? It's affectionately called the grenade story, even though there's no grenades in the story. But that's fine. But can you share with the audience your grenade story? And let's start from the fact that you were at MIT and you were probably a student leader organizing different things, and you decided to shoot for the moon, and you basically landed on the moon, and the moon, and then many things happened while you're on the moon. So can you just share that story? I think it's such an incredible story.
Well, in my time at DuPont, I was in the engineering plastics division. It's high performance reinforced plastics. It goes to automobiles, computers, structures. And oddly enough, the most direct competitor of DuPont was General Electric. GE at the time was a very different company from it was now. Right?
In the 80s, it was huge.
In the 80s, it was the most valuable company in the world, largest company in the world, and the most admired, iconic CEO in the world, Jack Welch. And Jack was a PhD chemical engineer who came up through the ranks at GE in the engineering plastics division, essentially. And so, so I sort of idolized him, and I'd had idols along the way growing up. Part of the reason I was at MIT as a kid is I followed everything about Apollo 11, and I thought Buzz Aldrin was really, really cool. And that's why I said someday I'll go to MIT like Buzz, And studying what Jack did, and as working at DuPont, looking at, I got to see how products are designed, R&D, how it's sold in marketing, how we manage it. And I liked the interplay. That was sort of a trigger to actually, this is what MBA students should do. This is what business people do as opposed to engineers. And so that was part of the reason I wanted to go to business school, and I got to go to MIT. And yes, I got involved in student government, and and we invite guest speakers on campus. Not that different from doing, iconic podcasts.
That's right. And, we shoot for the moon. We got you, Manny.
I don't know. So it's like, I'm not comparing myself, but it's like, so he then said, well, who would I like to speak? So of course I wrote a letter to Jack Welch.
You wrote a letter, just a simple letter. Wow.
I wrote a simple letter. Back then it was actually, and by the way, doing your research, Jack was legendary for handwritten notes.
So you wrote a handwritten note. Love it.
So I wrote a formal letter with a handwritten note on top, sent it to his office in Fairfield, Connecticut. I did call. Mr. Welch receive it. And, you set expectations. Business school invites you, you may or may not say yes. By the way, I do my best now to talk to business schools whenever I can, because I'm always grateful that Jack came. And I was at Columbia not that long ago. I'll do chats at INSEAD. I still come to MIT every year. So he's nice enough to say yes, right? So yeah, Jack comes on campus, and as the student host, we got to, maybe 5 or 6 of us, we got to prep him, and then I went up and introduced him in an auditorium with a podium in the middle. And then I sat down, and Jack got ready to do his speech. And this is sort of a classic large auditorium in a college with a big center aisle. And someone came running down the center aisle in a hazmat suit with a gas mask, carrying a fuming pail. So it was not a grenade. I'm not sure.
The fuming pail doesn't sound as sexy as grenade.
It's like someone said, "Hey, I heard you jumped in a grenade." No, I'm not that stupid. But someone dropped the flaming pail in front of the podium. Jack jumps back. The whole audience, jumps back. And I had a hypothesis. I kind of think I know what this is. I put up my handkerchief, grabbed it, and brought it outside. And it turned out we didn't stop for anything and, get campus security, close the door. It was dry ice and water. Which, by the way, you go back to my childhood in the Philippines with children's parties. And that's one of the things you do create effects in children's parties. So Jack, to his credit, he continued on and delivered his address. And so, yes, that is a true story, but it wasn't a grenade. I'm not sure why this is a big enough deal to be in Wikipedia, by the way, but it's that's sort of what that happened. And and then obviously the codicil, the end of the story is I did get a handwritten note. Thanks for having me. Come down to G headquarters and see me. And this was in the fall of 1989.
This is your second year? Second year of
I was a second year student.
Okay.
I had already spent 10 weeks of my life in my summer job at Bain & Company. And, my business idol invites me to come see him. So I thought, of course.
Did you have a meal or coffee or anything?
Oh, this is where it got really cool, so I show up at GE headquarters and go to his office, and I kind of see how CEOs live. This is how CEOs live then. That's not how they live now.
Is this in New York, by the way, or where was it?
It's in Fairfield, Connecticut.
Oh, Connecticut. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I think GE has now moved HQ to Boston, but back then, so I took a train. I took the Amtrak from Boston to Fairfield, and so next to his office, he's got his own dining room, right?
Wow.
And the table is set up for 4. There's menus, and a waiter comes in a tux to take your order. I said, wow, this is really this is what happens. And so he invited 2 people to lunch with me. And one was a VP of marketing in the engineering plastics division of GE. And the other was the corporate VP of strategy and M&A for GE Inc. Their names are Tom and Jeff, by the way. So he said, okay, here's the deal, Manny. I want you to spend the afternoon here following Tom around and see what he does. Then tonight, head over to Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where GE headquarters are. And I want you to spend tomorrow following Jeff around and see what he does. And then let's chat at the end of the week and you tell me who you want to work for. That was the best, coolest job offer, because it wasn't really an interview process. It said, I didn't really save your life, man. It wasn't a grenade or anything. So yeah, that was amazing. And in the end, and by the way, Jeff was a guy named Jeffrey Immelt.
Oh, I know Jeffrey Immelt. He's famous for big ideas. He had the big idea program at GE after. But
at the time, he was a young HBS VP of marketing in the plastics business. And anyway, I graciously told Jack, I had a great summer in this firm called Bain & Company. I'd like to, I think I've accepted, I'm going to go back, but I hope we stay in touch because I think it's actually good for my career, et cetera, to do this. And he was quite gracious. He said, I have kids in business school and I understand what consulting firms do. So, when you're ready, give me a call. That was basically, how it ended. And I never called him.
You said no to your idol. Do you realize that?
Yeah, that was sort of explaining to my parents, who didn't understand what consulting was or who Bain was, and they were in Manila by then, and to the day my dad died, he introduced me as his son, the banker. Somehow he could get behind. My son did good. He was a banker. He couldn't introduce me as his son, the consultant, but they knew who Jack Welch and GE were. It's like, it's like, Emmanuel, what a stupid thing to do.
Well, I think
anyway, that's an ancient story.
That's a fantastic story. So I do have a question. I read somewhere that when you made Partner, one of the things they asked partners to do is really write a personal mission statement. Can you talk a little bit about what you wrote and where you are on that journey to achieve that mission statement?
One of the reasons I actually joined this much smaller firm is, a big part of it's the people you meet, right? We are a people business. You want to work with people you enjoy. I've learned, this is probably true from the time I was young playing team sports to today as a fan of team sports. I'm not that good anymore in team sports. I'm maybe halfway decent at one individual sport, that you swing a club at. But I've always liked teams. I've always valued teams. And, so a lot of why you join a firm is because you like the team. But this firm did have a mission statement. So to some degree, it's a statement of purpose. It appealed to me. It's still in the lobby of every one of the offices today. And now we have like 69 instead of 5. And the mission is to create such high levels of value together with our clients that we set new standards of excellence in our respective industries. And this mission demands a few things, one of which is a community of extraordinary teams. That's an organizational mission. And I'm kind of a believer we all should have a purpose and mission in our own lives as an individual. And, you don't know when you'll find it. So an exercise I'd encourage everybody to do is to actually write an individual mission statement, right? What is my equivalent? And that is an exercise that we do in our partner training program. And, it's structured and it's you work, you write, you have thoughts. And I still remember, maybe relatively verbatim, even though it's been probably 30 years, right? It was, to build a life with purpose and meaning, or to live a life with purpose and meaning and build a good family and firm for the world. Every word should be meaningful. A life with purpose and meaning. Build a family and firm. Again, back to family should be ahead of firm. I didn't really know, by the way, that the firm would be the firm I just made partner of, and that it'd be kind of the firm I'd work for the next 30 years.
To me, this is such a meaningful discussion about the idea of purpose and meaning. I love the way you talk about purpose being something that drives you, and that the goal is to actually focus in on creating a great family and creating a great firm. And those are really your North Stars. And to me, that's powerful. And the fact that all of us can have purpose. And I think the other thing I thought was really amazing is what you consider meaningful when you were talking about a great family. You didn't talk about achievements or awards or schools that they went to. By the way, they all went to incredible schools. They all very accomplished. Your entire family and, going back from your grandparents on are incredibly accomplished. But you talked about values. You talked about character. You talked about, how good of a person they are and that they're marrying a good person. And I think when we think about the idea of values and what is of value, those things are the ones that you shared. And to me, those are the ones that I think speak volumes to what's really meaningful. I want to go back to the idea of purpose. And you actually changed Bain's mission statement. And you talked about the idea of every word matters. Well, in fact, you actually deleted one word.
Yes.
And so you made all the other words more meaningful. In fact, you made one of the words even more meaningful by deleting the qualifier in front of it. Can you explain that?
That was sort of I don't know if that was a tough choice, because, when you do have the iconic, the legendary writing of the mission statement where they labored over every word.
And it's in every office and every wall.
It's in every office. It's there's two things in every office of Bain & Company. In the lobby is the mission statement. Sometimes it's just part one. There's 5 parts of the mission statement. It's just part one. Our mission creates such high levels of value. And then every office has the list of Bright Dix Award winners, which is the award we give for the person below partner who most contributed to development of their team, their people, named after, 2 Bain managers who died in the Pan Am 104 over Lockerbie, Scotland in the early 90s. And that in itself is meaningful, that we symbolize the most important award in our firm. Ain't revenues, ain't intellectual property. It's developing people. So I did make a change in the mission statement, and this is, this was probably a sign of the times of both strategic shift and maybe back to values in the world. The mission statement used to read, to create such high levels of economic value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in the early days of Bain, in the 70s of 80s, together with that, we had a stock price chart of Bain's clients versus the market. And therefore, if you were really doing your job as a Bain consultant, because Bill Bain had the idea that this is about results, not reports. A mission that was about driving economic value was very consistent with what the strategic intent of the company was. And this is not even to get into, overly simplistic, Chicago School, Milton Friedman, how do you measure? It just felt, as I was given the opportunity to serve the firm, our managing partner is very much a servant leader role, that the set of clients we work on, the set of issues we work on are just broader than economic. And the important things in the world are not just raising the stock price of a publicly traded company. Because, your client, first of all, your client could be private. Your client could be a nonprofit that's not about a stock price, because we do have a social impact practice. And so arguably it wasn't that big a deal, but because every word had been labored on by the founders, it was actually I didn't know if, is there a constitutional process to get approval?
You are the CEO. It doesn't matter.
And, so I said, because does it mean Bain has a rotational leadership model. Does it mean every managing partner can just edit the mission statement willy-nilly? I mean, you have mission statements are meant to be not necessarily timeless, but have a longitudinal dimension that they can cross generations, right? It's not the annual budget plan.
It has gravitas, yes.
It has gravitas. It has meaning. It's what we aspire for, and it's always still out there. And you can, but that one elimination of that one qualifier doesn't mean economic doesn't matter, by the way, right? And that probably came at a point in time in our society that the definition of shareholder value to stakeholder value was getting in, and that's even that concept is under fire from some quarters, but it's still value. And then you could have interpret that a little bit how you want, have a little bit more freedom and leeway in what you're actually trying to accomplish. It's still about together with our clients to set new standards of excellence in our respective industries. And the ability to continue to attract the best, the brightest, the most principled, the one with the best values, and not just attract them, to at least retain them. And some of us will do great things elsewhere, like the great Mr. Sun Yu or John Donahoe we've talked about, and some of us will just stay here for a long time. But I do think this idea of what is the mission of a company goes part and parcel with how you attract and retain people. And especially for companies whose product is the people, it becomes really, really important.
During the height of the Asian hate crimes, I was left with a sense of disbelief and anger. These feelings prompted me to write a Forbes article titled, "Who Owns the AAPI Brand?" It's clear that branding such a diverse community is difficult. Yet in the absence of a cohesive brand narrative, derogatory stereotypes and racial slurs were created. Fortunately, the AAPI community did come together and form TAF, the Asian American Foundation, to not only combat Asian hate, but to also share positive narratives that fight bias and promote belonging. TAF has launched numerous programs to support this effort, including the Iconic Podcast. Please visit TAF.org to learn more, and to subscribe to this podcast, please visit iconicpodcast.com. Join me in supporting TAF, because together we make a difference.
And so it ended up being freeing once you got past just the person, I'm flawed, I'm human too. It turns out I did want that job. And I was disappointed. And so I said, that's okay, and it's, we all will get disappointments. It's a matter of how you've shake yourself up.
It's amazing that you have this rotational leadership and that served Bain so well. And I think that change of the purpose by deleting the word economic, yes, it really opened up new where to plays and how to wins in terms of your company. And I really appreciate the courage it took to do that. As I think about kind of some of the lessons that you've learned about being grateful and gracious, but also, having a certain amount of grit applied to that. And then this idea of applying all of that towards purpose and a North Star and really trying to, I think, seek meaning that speaks to your values. Was there a time for you where all those things were really challenged, where you just didn't feel as grateful, or you didn't feel like you had enough grit to get through it, or maybe even the idea of your mission statement or purpose, you actually had to question it? Was there a moment sort of in this journey where you looked at it and it felt really challenged?
I understand because of the hero's journey framing. There has to be the Empire Strikes Back movie in the middle of the two other Star Wars, which, by the way, is my favorite Star Wars movie. But I will admit, and it's that I guess 12, 13 years ago, when I did put myself forward for consideration, that and they asked somebody else, that for all I'm prepared and positive and grateful, it hit me hard. And it also created some fears, by the way. And so, there's an ambition thing in all of us, and it actually bothered me, by the way, that why did I have this kind of a of emotional negative reaction as opposed to I should be grateful I was even considered. I'm lucky I'm in this firm, but. So it took a while for me to come to grips with it and actually think about, well, maybe I should do something else. But because that's a nice trigger. Well, is that what for your noble purpose and mission? Maybe kind of you want to do the CEO thing, and if you can't do it here, you'll do it somewhere else. It helped me step back, and maybe for probably only one of the 2 or 3 times in my own career at Bain, I actually did consider doing other things. And it allowed me to step back and actually decide, okay, in my head, I've left. And let me now think about what I want to do with the rest of my life. Do I want to continue? And I still think I'm doing well. That's why I have perspective on that mission statement. Things didn't change. I still had a good family. I still have all the gifts, God and others gave me that, I could contribute to society in different ways. And so it ended up being freeing once you got past just the person, I'm flawed, I'm human too. It turns out I did want that job. And I was disappointed.
That's right. Disappointed. That's a big word. Yes.
And so I said, that's okay, and it's, we all will get disappointments. It's a matter of how you've checked yourself up and just be grateful for the opportunity and really the privilege of being a Bain partner. And I tried to do everything I could to help Bob, who they picked, and I did that for the next 6 years. And then, then 6 years later, I guess this is part of the journey, when in our rotational bottle, the nominating committee came around again, said, Manny, would you put your hat in the ring? I took my wife away for a weekend. And she said, okay, Lears, we're in this together. I said, really? You're going to do that again? And if you don't get it, who's going to pick you up off the floor this time? I said, no, I'm good. I'm going to go in with zero expectations, but I'm going to give it everything I have, because I actually think it'd be good for the firm and good for me to play this role. And because I think it's good for the firm, I owe it to the firm to put everything I have behind the consideration process. Because I'm actually not sure I did that the first time around, by the way. And that's where it's not just disappointment in these things. Sometimes it's even worse, is regret.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you actually feel like you didn't give it your all. So this way was no regrets. I'll give it my all. And by the way, I've been through it. If they decide not to ask me to do it, I'll still have lived a good life. I'll be grateful for what I have. I still have a great wife, great family. I'm still a great Bain partner. And then obviously, this time around, they said, hey, Manny would like to ask you to be our next managing partner. And then, so I was grateful for that. And I'm grateful to have had the chance to do it for the last 6+ years now. And I hope I've been able to contribute to Bain in this role. And hopefully there's much more to do in the future as well.
I think this is a very powerful lesson, and I'm really living your lesson right now. The idea that we all get disappointed, but there are times when we're disappointed, we just don't want to be in the, how do you want to say this? We don't want to deal with disappointment. We kind of want to put it aside. We want to avoid it. We don't want to live in disappointment. But I think, to your point and to your credit, it's okay to say I wanted something, I didn't get it. And it's okay to say I'm disappointed and all that comes from that. And then to use that energy, even though it's painful, to be, I think, sort of clarifying, right? To really self-reflect and to then hopefully, understand that, hey, you're human and it's okay to have things that you want and to be self-interested. That's okay. But then to also rise above that, or above is probably the wrong word, just to, I think larger than just that pure disappointment. The second thing I took away from this is that you had the courage to be disappointed again. And that takes a lot of courage to say, I'm going to get disappointed a second time and maybe even a third time. But I also fathom that you were probably a much different CEO than maybe you would have been if you had been a CEO 6 years earlier.
Yeah, I do think that's often a gift in situations like this, that, I would say those intervening 6 years where, I did do a lot of things I hadn't done, which I probably didn't appreciate, spend more time in other parts of the world, in Europe in particular, because our firm was becoming truly global. Seeing, really immersing myself in a broad range of clients rather than my old model, which is literally work with one client for 4 or 5 years and I'm integrative. I think that I was probably better prepared, and arguably it was the right time, for the firm. And so, you never know how these things work out, that it was a good thing. And so, allowing yourself to be disappointed, and it's okay, but also letting yourself celebrate, So I did take a little bit of time with my family, say, hey, I'm excited. I'll get to do this. I remember, by the way, because my dad had passed away at this time, and I called my younger brother, who's a junior, and he said, "Ernest, I wish I could make this call to my dad, to our dad. I'm going to call you."
Wonderful.
That was it.
I know you're very close to your brothers. I think you guys have many talents, and one of them is, I think, singing and performing together. So I know you're very close, and in some ways it's full circle, because you, instead of going to your dad, you went to the generation that sort of the youngest generation of your family in terms of the family. I believe you even sung at your mom's funeral together.
Oh wow, you've really done your research.
Your style kind of reminds me of apple hiking, or
we my brothers and I, that's a trio in the Philippines, and my brothers and I used to cover their songs. So we, as kids, five boys were a basketball team, but then we became a little bit of a singing group, and that was sort of that's also something that many Filipinos share. For those of you who have ever been to karaoke bars, we hog the mics. You go to any lounges in Asia, it's usually a Filipino band, and
they're amazing. They're so talented, right?
And one of the most fun things at Bain, you remember the Bain band in the Bay Area. There's probably 20 offices around the world that have a proper band. And one of the small number of perks of being in this job is if you're visiting an office and you're a guest speaker at the big, Christmas or summer offsite event, and the band knows you're around and invites you to sing a song, you'll say, "Yes, please, give me a mic." And that's
part of the collegial part of Bain. Now, I know you have been an incredible contributor and I think member of TAF, and I know you love strategy. And so when you marry the idea of strategy and you think about what should the go forward strategy be for the AAPI community, when I ask you that from a strategy consultant's point of view, and the AAPI being your client, what comes to mind?
Well, I think part of the the positivity and a goodness for me is that is to define being Asian American and the Pacific Islander as something to be proud of, something that's a position of strength, and that's kind of, and I'm probably over-indexing to how I would frame it, because I fully acknowledge that for many, that's not how it might feel. If you're an underrepresented community, if it's a diverse community and you don't have the same opportunities, and that's very real. I've been fortunate that way, I guess, given where and how I grew up, where I live, in the Bay Area, etc. But I do think I'd start with, when I say it's a position of strength, it's something to be grateful for. There's goodness in having heritage that's this big tent called Asian Americans, whether it's Filipino or Chinese or Indian or Japanese, etc. That allows us, I think, perspective in a world that's become global and interconnected. It allows us to be inherently able to operate with multiple, with all multiple aspects of society, right? Because it's a diverse group within, and so for me, the way to how do we think about that as a generally, and you could put just as many stereotypes and the positivity that can be flipped around. It's like hardworking, generally are able to do well in school, etc. But I'd like to start by thinking about it ultimately. So how can this community, and the A in Asian American matters a lot, right? Because it's Asian and American, or you could say it's American Asian. You can even flip. be be really value adding, contributing, meaningful members of our society, both country and global. So for me, if it were me, I'd say, yeah, this is not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to be negative about. It's not something to be pessimistic about. It's something to celebrate and be optimistic. That's how I've always viewed being a Filipino, being an Asian American. It's like I could operate with all the different races. I can understand nuance. I understand global issues better because generally we have a reasonable affinity to, even though we're American, I'm a U.S. citizen, to nations that are important part of the global economy. So I'd like to, I don't mean to diminish that there are challenges that, we'll face around racism, around hate, around discrimination. And, but I also don't want to over-index to that and view it as this is as much a positive thing we can build on as it is a challenge that needs to be overcome.
Yeah. And I think the podcasts and the sponsors of the podcast, TAF and the founders of the Asian Alumni Chapter at the Stanford Business School, I think fully endorse this idea of, yes, we need to focus on safety. Yes. With all the Asian hate, and we need to create a greater sense of belonging. But in all of that, we also need to celebrate and through that celebration, feel a great deal of pride. And as my last question to you really is about this idea of, who else would you like to invite to be a guest at for the AAPI podcast that we would take great pride in hearing their hero's journey?
Well, I think the nice thing about being associated with TAF is, you get to meet lots of great people who have been accomplished in their fields, who are contributing to society in many different ways. And some of them have become close friends. Sheila Marcello, who is as a great, take a company public, Filipino CEO. I have a very good friend who's going to come here to this office in a little bit if he's already waiting outside. Also GSB grad, by the way, Eric Kim.
Eric Kim, okay, yes, founder
of Good Water Capital. And by the way, that term "good water" actually has meaning, because he does try to do good. So it's a large group. I'd encourage you to have a broad tent. It's not, not just business people, but people from different parts of society. TAF has celebrated folks in the arts, folks in government, folks in civil service, folks in business. And because it's a big tent, it's very nice that, you'll have people from, very, very different ethnic backgrounds because, while we're all Asian, there's meaningful differences between, all the different flavors of Asianness. And we can be rivals of each other. I have a lot of friends who said the single most fun thing they've done ever was attend an India-Pakistan cricket game in New York this past Sunday. It's like, and said, wow, that's a big part of the community and in the country too. So, go broad would be my suggestion.
We'll definitely go broad. We'll celebrate the idea of our unique differences and the sort of a coalition of differences that we all have. I appreciate you suggesting those guests. They will definitely go after them. Manny, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your stories of incredible resilience with incredible gratitude and a very clear North Star that you are still to this day focused on. And I very much appreciate our friendship. And I'm so glad we reconnected after all these years.
Hey, I'm so grateful. Thanks for giving me the gift. And, whoever happens to listen to this, thanks for the gift of your time. Hope this was useful, even in some modest way. And let's go hang out now.
Let's do that. Thanks, Manny. Take care. Listen to all episodes of AAPI on aconicpodcast.com. You can also catch new episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.